Thanks very much, Becky, for the introduction. And it's really good to see everybody here on the call, knowing that a lot of you are preparing in the next 24 hours to start half term at the end of another long, grueling half term. But we felt from Socialist Alternative's perspective that a meeting discussing the current situation, the action that we are currently involved in, and kind of perspectives and what needs to be done really in the course of that campaign is absolutely essential. And I'm going to talk really in many ways to the leaflet that we put out last week at the fantastic rallies and demonstrations up and down the country on the first day of all of the NEU strike action that has taken place. And I know we've got colleagues on there and comrades on the line who were involved in the sixth form action that started earlier in the academic year, but last Wednesday really brought the kind of full ranks of the NEU into the picture in terms of the fight on pay and the fight on funding. And that has obviously come at the end of really an historic ballot by the NEU, a task that was no small feat to mobilize members in over 23,000 workplaces and achieve the biggest number of people voting in an industrial action ballot since the introduction of the 2016 Trade Union Act and the thresholds that have been used really as a way of trying to cut across any action. So to achieve the result in the ballot in and of itself was testament firstly to a burning anger amongst school workers about pay, but also in relation to conditions. Tonight I've been at a meeting where there is a discussion in a local school of redundancies and restructures. I've also today been at a meeting where there's a school considering academization. The whole system is in many ways broken, and it has been broken by this government. And last Wednesday's action was an opportunity actually for the beginnings of a very significant fight back, particularly on the question of school funding, and obviously around that, the question of pay for teachers and for support staff. But the question of funding is fundamental, because this government, in the course of their tenure, has sought to reduce the amount of money that's going into school budgets, and the vast majority of a school budget goes on paying people who actually work with the children in order to have decent class sizes, in order to reduce workload so that students actually get decent feedback and intervention. This government have presided over a massive erosion in the amount of money being spent on state education, and this is a conscious policy and a conscious step that they have taken. This is not, as they try and pose it, some sort of kind of natural process responding to changing economic landscapes. And so I think that was reflected in the ballot turnout. It was also reflected in tremendous demonstrations up and down the country last week, and I'm sure people will comment on their areas. But I was at the demonstration in London, which had upwards of 40,000 people on it, with Whitehall being closed due to health and safety because the sheer numbers of people on that demonstration. For a weekday demonstration, it is really, really significant, but it is it's a sign of the times, and it's a sign of new people coming into activity, of people fed up, deciding that enough is enough, and wanting to take action. But in many ways, the most important and encouraging sign from last Wednesday's action was the phenomenal picket lines that took place around the country. And the NEU has always had, or the NUT in particular, before it, but has always had a good tradition of holding, town centre and city centre demonstrations, very good marches, big public events. But the tradition of the picket line, an active picket line engaging with not just passers-by, but workers going into the workplace, that's not maybe at the forefront of a lot of people, NEU members' minds. And so to jump on the bus in Lewisham from my school in the south of the borough to go to the rally we had in the centre of the borough, I passed countless picket lines along the way, seeing incredible turnouts, but importantly seeing active picketing, support staff refusing to cross picket lines, and showing solidarity, but also understanding that this is also their fight as well, because it's related to the question of funding and school budgets, and that is really a sea change. After the kind of giddy beginning, tonight we need to decide what needs to happen next and what kind of strategy and what kind of tactics need to be employed in order to win this dispute. Because I think another thing that needs to be underlined is that last Wednesday's strikes were not just the protests. They were not just an opportunity just to let off some steam, march through the city centre. They were the beginnings of an industrial struggle with the government to win more money for education and ultimately to win a fully funded pay rise. And that's still a point I think we need to hammer home, is that this is potentially going to be the beginnings of quite a bitter struggle with the government. They obviously did some kind of red baiting and found opportunities to to kind of try and rubbish teachers and undermine education staff in the run up to the strike, but maybe held back from some of the most vicious attacks, understanding that there was public mood generally supportive of the strikes in education and in health. But this government understands the significance of this strike, and it understands the significance of this strike because of its relationship to all of the other disputes that are taking place, and actually its relationship to them maintaining power in the Conservative Party, and not ceding it because of splits, but also because of the increased confidence of workers taking action. So I think if I now start to talk about what I think needs to happen next, one of the most important things that needs to happen, and we really highlighted this as one of the central things on our leaflet for last week, was the importance of coordination with other unions. Primarily, or initially, the question of coordination with other education unions is significant. The NESUWT missed the ballot thresholds, but are currently, they had a national executive meeting today, and are certainly seriously considering reballoting. That we also have the action or the kind of tacit support of the National Association of Head Teachers, who gave advice and instruction to their members in relation to the day, but again missed the balloting thresholds, and so weren't formally allowed to take action. But we know that there are also live disputes happening, in other places. The RCN picket lines have been tremendous. A group of workers that haven't, or a union that hasn't taken action in this way before. And we need to find opportunities to coordinate with the RCN, also with the PCS, who were out on strike on the same day as us, came on the demonstration. Likewise with the UCU, who have been out on strike. And again, there is, coordination around the dates, but how we kind of intensify that and in local areas seriously coordinate action and think about how we complement each other's disputes in order to win is very significant. Because I think one thing the Conservatives will be extremely concerned about is about a kind of contagion. They've seen the contagion of the strike wave, of workers seeing the strike as an important tool in their armory and wanting to take action, and that's spread very quickly. They will also be concerned about the spread of a victory and the confidence that might give. So we've seen today, for example, the 7% offer given to the fire brigades union, backdated to July, which is a very significant offer compared to what has been offered to many public sector workers. But that will give a taste, I think, to a number of public sector workers, including in the NEU, to see actually fighting, or even the threat of fighting, the case of the firefighters has on this situation. The government will want to obviously hold out on that. They want to hold out on that for different political reasons, but also for their own economic reasons, because a big part of their tenure in office has been about the transfer of wealth from the mass of the population into the hands of the super rich, and they don't want to see that reversed by industrial action. So coordination is going to be essential on a national scale, but also on the ground. It's also an opportunity to reinvigorate trades councils in some areas, or rebuild a kind of tradition of coordination, whether that's initially through kind of ad hoc conferences locally of trade unions, or committees set up to coordinate the dispute. But I think the other area we need to look at, and I think it's an important discussion and debate we need to have within the NEU, is about the question of escalation. The timetable that's put in place at the moment is a timetable of, we've had our 1 day of national action. We are about to go into a period of rolling regional action, which has, I think from the outset, had definite downsides to it, because of the potential for it to weaken that kind of collective action, but particularly with the NESUWT missing the threshold, and that ability to coordinate with them, that will have an impact in certain areas of the country where the NEU is maybe weaker and the NESUWT stronger. And then we move to a very significant 2 days of action around the 15th and 16th of March, the 15th of March being budget day, and a day when we're seeing more unions announcing action, but with all eyes on Westminster for what the Tories will do in relation to public funding of health, of education, and there will be tremendous pressure for them to respond to that. So that those days are going to be very, very important, and we need to build mass turnouts from all around the country to London on that day, doing everything we can to get people from our own union, but also parents and supporters along to that, to have a huge mobilization. But we cannot engage in wishful thinking on this. We cannot just assume that a huge turnout on the 15th of March is going to be enough to beat the Tories. It may be that the pressure that's building on them will mean that they will try and offer a bit of a carrot to the NEU to try and cut across the action, possibly offering the slightly improved pay offer, or at least submitting something to the school teachers review body that maybe is something they can sell better in the media, or maybe announcing more money going into education in that particular budget, and that would obviously be significant, and it would be and it would be a victory in and of itself. But we need to be really clear about what we think a victory is in this dispute, which is a 12% pay rise fully funded. And that is, that's what inflation was at the end of September. That was our initial demand. And that's what we need to be really clear with members about in terms of what a victory looks like. And that, inevitably that will require discussing what do we do if the 15th, 16th of March doesn't come off, because we are talking then obviously after the Easter holidays, about potential action in the summer term and the impact that then has on exam groups, on primary testing, how the media will try and spin that, how they will try and divide families and students against school workers and particularly teachers, in those kind of key exam years. So we need to have a clear understanding of what a strategy of escalation would look like, and how we really this is a giant high risk game of chicken, isn't it? It's about who blinks first in this situation, and we need to be absolutely clear that we're willing to take to take action, and we're willing to go to the end to win it. And that means having a clear understanding of how we do that. So after 2 days in March, then the inevitable thing would be to look at an escalation, of setting a timetable for potentially after the Easter holidays of 3 days of action in 1 week, possibly then escalating the next week, and trying to intensify that action to win before we get to the kind of end of the summer term, when inevitably things will wind down, the mood will dissipate, and then we have the summer holidays as a break, which will have six weeks really where there will be no action. So the school year itself has a certain rhythm to it. We need to think, how do we maximize turnout on that? That will require lots of discussion within branches to prepare people. This is what we need to do. It will need financial preparation as well. Hardship funds have already been set up within the NEU, but they would probably be called upon more in the course of that. And it would also require a really, really clear idea of how we would leverage in other areas, how we would stop schools buying in agency workers to cover, and so on, in order to win that dispute. The other 2 things we raised in the leaflet were about politicizing the strike and pointing out where money is going in education. There are millions of pounds, billions in fact, being paid to private finance initiative companies every year by schools effectively for leasing their own buildings, and yet we are seeing budget cuts, we're seeing some schools falling apart, and we're seeing no fully funded pay rise. We see huge amounts of money given to the supply agencies because of the privatization of supply and not the reintroduction of supply pools run by local authorities. And of course there is money going into the pockets of lawyers, CEOs and so on, through the academization program as well. So there is a magic money tree in education. It exists. We need to find it, we need to dig up its roots, and we need to use it for ourselves, but that requires political arguments. And that's why we are socialists. We understand that that the wealth in society is created by the majority, and it should be put to the betterment of the majority, and not to fleece the nests of the vultures who want to take things into their own hands. I mean, the final point we raised in the leaflet that is becoming increasingly important, particularly with the decision made today to withdraw action in Wales, to postpone action for talks with the Welsh government because of an offer of a kind of paltry offer of 1.5% consolidated and 1.5% not consolidated. That's not a victory by any means, something that the NEU itself has accepted in the comments that have been made. But by postponing action, it does have an impact. It has an impact on momentum, it has an impact on confidence, and it sets a precedent as well. What if the Tories turn around and make some happy noises about putting a little bit more money into education, maybe offering a 3.5% pay rise next year, rather than 2% pay rise? It potentially can be used to weaken the strike at a really critical moment, because the regional action is based on this idea of a kind of building momentum. But regions around the country taking action, that rolling across the country. If you have if you have one national section of the union effectively postponing action, then that can have a knock-on effect across the country, and confidence, and momentum can go both ways. So I think we need to say part of it is about democratizing the dispute. Every single member needs to feel like they should have ownership over this dispute, understand what a victory would look like, understand that whatever deal is potentially going to be put to members, that they have time to scrutinize that, they have time to ask questions, they have time to put alternatives, and ultimately have a binding vote on whether to accept or to reject. But that obviously requires, within our branches, having the discussions, having the debates, and the formation potentially of our own organisations, strike committees, potentially within the union that have teeth and that actually oversee and feed into this. So just to kind of finish up, the last remarks that I've got is, this meeting this evening is designed to be a contribution to debate within the union. We want a democratic union that amplifies the voices of the over 450,000 people who were members of the NEU before the ballot started, and the 40-odd thousand people who have joined in the last few weeks after the action has been announced. We need to ensure that those people don't just see the union as some kind of abstract body in an office in London that calls on them once in a while and is there on the end of a phone for advice, but that they understand that they them and their colleagues in their workplace organised is what the union is built on. It's built on workplaces and workplace organisation, and that's where our power is. And that's what the Conservatives ultimately are fearful of. We can be skilled negotiators, we can sit around the table, we can make clever points on the evening news, but ultimately the thing that is going to shift this government is whether schools are open or closed, and the knock-on impact that has across the economy and across the workforce as well. So I think we should take heart. Last Wednesday was a fantastic start, but we are a really critical phase in the dispute now, where we need to we need to be sharp and we need to be putting forward ideas, but also listening about the way forward. So thanks very much, comrades.